Samael, the shadow of communication. Integrated quality, Hod, majesty, community. Hod, meaning majesty, represents the conscious expression of truth through humility, communication, reflection, and understanding. It is through Hod that our inner world becomes shared with others. Thought becomes language, understanding becomes dialogue. Knowledge becomes wisdom through relationship. Communication is far more than the exchange of information. It is the bridge through which understanding, trust, cooperation, and community are built. Hod reminds us that truth is not simply something to possess, it is something to embody. True communication seeks neither victory nor validation, it seeks understanding. When communication is rooted in humility, words become instruments of clarity rather than conflict. They illuminate rather than divide. The shadow, Samael, the shadow of communication. Within the symbolic framework of this book, Samael represents the fragmentation of communication. Where Hod expresses truth with humility and understanding, Samael distorts communication through ego, fear, and unconscious identification. The purpose of communication quietly changes. Rather than seeking understanding, it begins seeking validation. Rather than expressing truth, it begins protecting identity. Words become instruments of self preservation. Silence becomes fear. Speech becomes control. The shadow of Samael is not communication. Communication is one of humanity's greatest gifts. The shadow arises when communication no longer serves truth. It begins serving the ego. Facts may remain accurate, yet their purpose becomes distorted. Communication ceases to build a relationship, it begins protecting identity. Repression, suppression. When Samael becomes repressed or suppressed, the individual gradually loses their authentic voice. Thoughts remain unspoken, needs remain hidden, boundaries become difficult to express. Truth is continually withheld through fear of rejection, conflict, or judgment. The individual learns to say what others wish to hear while quietly abandoning what they genuinely know or feel. Authenticity slowly gives way to self protection. Silence becomes mistaken for peace. Yet unspoken truth does not disappear, it becomes resentment, confusion, distance. Relationships slowly weaken because genuine communication has been replaced by avoidance. Suppressing truth rarely preserves relationship, it gradually erodes it. Possession. When Samael becomes possessed, communication becomes governed by ego. The individual feels compelled to prove themselves. Knowledge becomes identity. Being right becomes more important than understanding. Listening becomes secondary to speaking. Questions become opportunities to persuade. Disagreement becomes personal. Language becomes a means of defending the self rather than discovering truth. Communication gradually becomes argumentative, manipulative, performative, or controlling. The individual no longer speaks to connect, they speak to preserve identity. Words cease becoming bridges, they become barriers. The desire to be understood quietly replaces the willingness to understand. Universal pattern. Samael represents the archetypal fragmentation of expression. Consciousness forgets that communication exists to reveal truth and instead begins using communication to defend identity. Expression becomes separated from understanding. Collective unconscious. Collectively, Samael appears wherever communication becomes polarized by ideology, propaganda, manipulation, outrage, misinformation, or the pursuit of influence over understanding. Public conversation gradually values certainty more than curiosity. Winning becomes more important than listening. Division grows wherever dialogue disappears. Individual psyche. Within the individual, Samael appears through fear of vulnerability, attachment to opinions, defensiveness, pride, insecurity, certainty, and the unconscious need to protect identity through communication. The individual gradually mistakes being correct for being whole. The inner dialogue itself becomes shaped by judgment rather than curiosity. The world in daily life, Samael becomes visible through our actions. We interrupt instead of listening. We avoid difficult conversations. We gossip rather than communicate directly. We exaggerate, we manipulate, we speak impulsively from emotion. We argue to win rather than understand. We remain silent when honesty is needed. Our communication gradually shapes every relationship we build. Reflection. Spend a few moments reflecting upon the way you communicate, not only with others, but with yourself. Ask yourself, do I seek understanding or validation? What truths am I afraid to speak? Where do I become defensive when challenged? Do I genuinely listen or simply wait for my turn to speak? When have my words created separation rather than connection? What conversations have I avoided that need honesty? Does my communication express truth or protect my identity? Recognition is the beginning of honest dialogue, for the quality of our communication ultimately shapes the quality of our relationships.